I'm Gemma, and I am the Senior HR Advisor and Quality Control Coordinator here at the Digital Accessibility Centre. I have multiple sclerosis. I have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, which is an invisible illness. It's not something that you can see, but it is equally as debilitating as a condition that is plainly visible. For example, somebody who is in a wheelchair or somebody who is blind. It can impact on your ability to walk. It can impact on your ability to see, to comprehend. It can leave you so tired that you're unable to do anything, but because externally you look absolutely fine, it's something that's not often considered. So in terms of the way that multiple sclerosis can affect people's day-to-day lives, so for example, getting online you can sometimes suffer with sensory overload if a website is very, very busy, or if it's got a lot of detail, or if it's overly wordy. If you are having a relapse or even a flare day, sometimes it's very difficult to take that information in, so sometimes you find using these things to be a little bit too overwhelming. In terms of physical aspect, sometimes it is too difficult to manage buildings that have stairs. Sometimes you can forget where things are, or you can trip because people have left things in places, or even because your body has decided to stop working when there is no obstacle. So in terms of the way that my condition can affect me in ways that perhaps people might not think to take into account. It's quite often, because it's an invisible illness, on the outside people will often say, but you look so well. Well, the reality is, and I've always said to them, if you turned me inside out, the truth of it would be very different. It would look very, very different. I do find that sometimes people are perhaps a little bit over the top in terms of the way that they interact with me, and sometimes I've had cause to complain that people maybe sometimes treat me like I'm made of porcelain. The reality is I'm not. When I'm not having a flare day, my body mostly functions, and that's fine. When I'm having a flare day and my body isn't functioning, often I've had to say to people, it's very kind of you to sort of speak on my behalf or decide that something is not for me because I might not be up to it. But the reality is you don't become invisible because you have an invisible illness. You still have a voice, you still have an opinion. And the way that you want to do things is, I find, is often very much forgotten, because they assume that because you have this affliction that you are incapable of making that decision. And the truth of it is even though you have an invisible illness, you are still a visible person with very real thoughts and feelings, and very real opinions and ideas on how you want to do things. And quite often, we are all very capable of saying when something is beyond our capability. So whilst it's lovely that people sometimes feel the need to speak on your behalf, the reality is most of the time it really isn't necessary. So a flare day. The definition of a flare day can vary from person to person. So one person, for example, say my MS nurse, might call a flare day an exacerbation of symptoms, whereas my consultant neurologist may call a flare day an actual relapse, and they are two very different things. A relapse is a new occurrence of symptoms, or a new episode of disability or disabling effects, whereas a flare day, as is regarded by my MS nurse, is an exacerbation of existing symptoms. So in my case, it might be that my leg becomes weak and I have to rely on a crutch, or that I lose the vision in my left eye. What the defining criteria is that it actually comes back. So a relapse is something that happens and stays, and a flare day is something that happens, but then it resolves. So if I'm having a flare day, you may well expect to not find me being able to do very much at all, whereas conversely, the next day I might be fine. Best way to describe it really is a bit like a frayed USB cable. One day it will transmit the signal no problem, the next day not so much. So I guess the thing with an invisible illness is people very often, like with a visible illness, they don't really know where the boundary exists in terms of when you should offer help and when you should refrain from offering help. I think really the litmus is that actually most people will tell you if they need help. And that should be sort of the gauge. I know that if I need help, I'm the first person to say, but if I don't say, generally speaking, people who know me know not to offer help, because it won't, there's a fine line between it being helpful and insulting. And that's a very honest take on it. It's not a very popular one, but it is very honest. But then I'm the same. If I see somebody struggling, my immediate response is to offer help. So I suppose from a human perspective, it's hard-coded into our DNA. So where it's working out where to gauge it. And I think the only way you can really do that is if somebody has asked for help, you should give it, but otherwise wait to be asked.